Are you drowning in tasks and losing focus on what really matters in your business? Did you know that every hour spent on invoicing, emails, data entry, or calendar chaos is an hour not spent growing your business? That's where Oak City Admins comes in. We handle the busy work so you can lead, scale, and breathe easier. For less than the cost of a full-time hire, you get a dedicated expert who pays for themselves in productivity. If the biggest obstacle in running your small business is delegating to elevating, let Oak City Admins help you grow. Smart support.
Captivating audiences for years with her wit and charm, straight from the networking floor to give you all the dirt, it's Dusta!
Hey y'all, and welcome to another exciting episode of Down Home Dirt, the show where we dive deep into the journey of entrepreneurship with those who took the plunge and all the ups and downs that come with it. I'm your host, Dusta, and today I am joined with Richard Gantt.
Gantt.
I don't know why I wanted to call you Grant, and I apologize.
A lot more people named Grant than Gantt.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
And this is your Gantt family law, your divorce. What is it?
Fortress.
Tell
Yeah,
us about that.
safe, secure, protected. That's the image we want to give people. I've been through a divorce. I believe you might have said you did. We don't have to make that a secret, but having gone through that, I remember how I felt when I was in that position, and you really wanted a safe place you could run to. And so that's what we provide, and we fight hard to provide that for people. And so that's our logo and image. We've got the castle, the fortress, where people can go for refuge.
I like that because when I was going through mine, I interviewed a couple of different divorce attorneys at the time, or family law, attorneys, and I had to ask some questions, and the answers I got were very interesting. So I like that you give that whole safety because that's something that you feel scared. So you need somewhere to go.
For good reason.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where did you come from? How did you end up in the Triangle?
Well, I've lived in sort of, if you want to widen out the circle around the triangle, I grew up in Sanford. From the time I was about 5, my parents moved there from Alabama. And then I went away for college, law school, business school, got married, had some kids, lived in Chicago, and then came back. And so I've been back practicing family law in North Carolina since 2013. Practiced family law in Chicago before that.
That's a journey. It's really cold up there.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun things to do inside. It's a good place.
I've never been, this is as far north as I've ever traveled in my life.
Oh, really?
So, there's that.
Well, that's okay.
I'm afraid of snow, and then I moved here because I'd never seen it, so that's a whole story.
Well, you'll see some eventually.
So let's talk about your journey into family law. What inspired you to specialize in family law, and what personal experiences or observations guided your decision?
I'd like to say that I was inspired to pursue family law. And for some people in life, you follow a path because of inspiration. And then other times, and sometimes it can be the best path, when you find something just through trial and error and you find out what works and you have a passion for. So when I moved to Chicago, I had not gone to law school there, so I had to retake the bar. At the time, we didn't have reciprocity between Louisiana, where I practiced, in Illinois. So I had to take another bar exam, and so I passed it and just got a job with a general practice law firm, got to practice in a number of different areas. And I quickly gravitated toward family law because I liked it. I liked the conflict and being in court and doing trials. I found it interesting, and I found I was good at it, but it wasn't anything I ever aspired to do. I think I had a lot of misconceptions about it. And I think a lot of people have misconceptions about family law and divorce court and things like that, which, maybe I can help, clear the air on some of those today. We'll see. But I didn't really know what it was until I started practicing it, and then I found out it was a great way to help people, and I liked it.
I completely understand that. My mom was a paralegal for many, many years. So she started out in family, decided that she couldn't handle it, and went into real estate and probate. She was like, I can't deal with this. I'm going to have a drinking problem. So what are some of the most common misconceptions that people have about family law and the divorce process?
All right, so I'll hit on a broad, big picture one, and then we can maybe drill down into some of the more substantive law ones. But I think the biggest misconception about family law in general for litigants, for public at large, is the idea that it's like court on TV. We find a lot of great movies and TV dramas. They're amazing because it's interesting to make it dramatic. Edge of your seat dramatic with, all sorts of conflict and raised voices and people jumping up and down, shouting at each other in court and all kinds of things. And that's not really usually how court is in the real world. It's not a free-for-all. It's not like on Judge, fill in the blank. It used to be Judge Judy, Judge Joe,
Mathis.
Judge Mathis. It's not where you just get to stand up there and say whatever you feel like saying. There are all sorts of rules about evidence and rules about what you can and can't talk about based on what was noticed for a hearing that day. All sorts of technical rules. So real court is very methodical. It's very rules-based. It's technical. And in some ways it's boring because you just got to grind through getting evidence in while the other side's fighting to keep it out. So it's not like it is on TV. I'd say another big picture one, a misconception people have is that the family court or divorce court is going to provide them an avenue to finally feel like all their concerns and hurts are vindicated and made right. Unfortunately, that's not really why family court exists, and that leaves some people disappointed because they think they're going to go in there and whoever hurt them is going to be set straight and put right, and there's going to be this narrative where someone says, "Ma'am, we believe everything you said, and you're the good person here." And that's not really why what it functions for. Family court is to divide property, arrange support so people and kids don't starve, and to allocate custody responsibility between parents. And other than that, the divorce judge just wants to say, let me check those boxes, get y'all going in different directions so you're not fighting anymore, and, find your own happily ever after. The judge isn't really there to say, now tell me every little thing about how he hurt you and you hurt him, and I'm going to really get you. That's not really why they're there.
No, and that's something I noticed a lot when people are going through divorce. They're always like, well, he did all this, and how can I get someone to side with me? Well, it's black and white, essentially. It's about what's best for the child.
It is in custody. Now, I'll tell people because, sometimes I'm talking about one side of my mouth about custody, and someone can hear that and imagine it applies to everything and get confused. So with custody, the judge doesn't want to hear anything about how the other person did you wrong unless it directly in the process shows mistreatment of kids. If it involves the kids, then sure. Now, people shouldn't conclude that means it's never relevant. What someone did to the other person all day long and 6 times on Sunday is relevant on alimony. So in North Carolina, alimony can take into consideration marital misconduct, basically how one spouse mistreated the other. You can talk about that till you're blue in the face. The judge is happy to hear about it. The judge can consider that as relevant.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, when dividing property, the judge can't hear about marital misconduct. It's not considered relevant. So really, the judge only wants to hear about how someone did you wrong and all the dirt and details if it directly involves the kids or for any reason with alimony. But other than that, well, I guess the exception would be with a domestic violence protection order, then yes, someone did someone wrong, and that's why you're there in court, and someone's going to pay for it.
That was the most interesting day in court I've ever been. There was a couple before me, and they were basically fighting amongst themselves, and the judge was like, I'm throwing this out because you just want to fight with each other. And I was like, wow. So that was very emotionally charged. Speaking of emotional impact, how do you help clients navigate the emotional challenges that often accompany family law cases such as divorce or child custody disputes?
Well, that's a great question. I think the best thing a family law attorney can do on that front is to just set and manage realistic expectations about what the process can and can't do for them. People are overwhelmed with emotions. I was a divorce litigant, and it's hard. It hurts, whether you're the person who did someone wrong or whether you've been done wrong, or in most cases, marriages break up because both people kind of done each other wrong a little bit. At least, it doesn't matter. It's hard. It's gut-wrenching, for a family to be divided and you're no longer in your house. At least one person isn't, and the kids are going to 2 different places. It's hard, and so what divorce litigants need to understand is that your divorce lawyer exists to help you navigate the legal path. Now, it's nice, just as an added bonus here and there, If your family lawyer also has some empathy for you, maybe that's their personality, or maybe they're like me, they've been through the process, hopefully a little bit of both. But that's not really their function. And, I often jokingly tell clients, and it kind of is a joke, but there's a big part of truth to it. I'll say, hey, listen, I get the impression that, you're cost sensitive. You don't want to burn through all your money on lawyers. And so one way you can save money is if you just feel like venting, if you feel like having a therapy session. Therapists are a lot cheaper than divorce lawyers in most cases. So get all that off your chest, but find a good therapist to do that. And then when you're talking to your divorce lawyer, you can focus on business at hand. How do we navigate the legal twists and turns of divorce court?
It can be very complicated, especially if you have lots of assets and other things as well. So moving forward, let's talk about the role of mediation. What is the role of mediation in family law, and when do you think it is most beneficial for clients to consider this option?
Well, mediation on some level is almost always required in family court. It's a hoop that people have to jump through before they can go to a custody hearing. They have to be in a type of mediation where it's just the two litigants and the mediator. The lawyers can't be involved in it. Then there's another type of mediation that is mandatory. Before you can go to a property division hearing, you have to go to financial mediation, where typically it's one spouse and their lawyer in one conference room, the other spouse and their lawyer in another conference room. The mediator then shuttles back and forth to try to broker a settlement, broker a deal, take offers back and forth. So the function is to try to settle the case and avoid having to go to court, and most cases do settle in mediation. I don't think anyone has an exact number, but just estimating, I'd say of the cases required to go to the big family financial all-day mediation, probably 75-80% of those cases settle and don't go any further with court. They just write up an order and get that done. But your question about when that's useful, I think it can always be useful unless you just know it's impossible to settle, and there are cases like that. But I think for people that aren't sure whether or not it's possible to settle, mediation is useful if you're ready for it, and it's a big waste of time if you're not. And what do I mean by that? Well, you usually can't settle, at least the financial part, unless you've got all the documents to analyze. And the lawyers can look and try to figure out what's usually 50-50, but not always, what's a fair division of property, or what's the calculation on child support or alimony. And if there are a bunch of documents missing to where the lawyer can't even advise the client, and the lawyer has to look at the client and say, I don't know if this is a good proposal or not because I can't analyze the numbers, well, then you're wasting your time going and sitting for a mediation. You're just going to run into a brick wall. So I think two things: if you've gotten all the financial documents exchanged, and if you've at least gotten to a point in conversation where you feel like there's a chance of settlement, then mediation is probably a good next step. But you want to kind of test the waters and find out how far apart you are. If one lawyer talks to the other and one lawyer says, just using numbers as an example, one lawyer says 100, the other lawyer says 0. Well, they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. Unless someone's willing to bend a little bit, if they both say, not going to budge 1 inch, well, then you're wasting your time in mediation, because mediation only works when people come to an agreement. There's no judge there to tell anyone what to do.
So the next step, if mediation doesn't work, is to see a judge.
Well, your option would be to see a judge, or to, I guess, figure out a settlement some other way. The spouses themselves, or maybe they reconcile.
That does happen a lot.
That happens sometimes.
I noticed that. That was actually one of the things that I discussed in my divorce, is they were telling me, like, what would happen if I decided to reconcile. And I was like, I would never even imagine that, but I didn't realize that there was also another side to it. So that's important. Let's talk about child custody consideration. In your experience, what factors do courts prioritize when determining child custody arrangements, and how can parents best prepare for these discussions?
Okay, well, broadly, anything that's relevant to the best interests of a child or children can be relevant for custody. But that's very broad. So beyond that, people want to know, okay, well, what specifically do judges focus on more than other things? And I think the two big ones are education and health or medical care. So if you have situations where it's clear based on the evidence that a child's educational development is going to be better served by being primarily with one parent, then that's a huge piece of evidence. If you have a situation where a child has a medical condition that's not being treated the right way, not paid attention to, and they're suffering because maybe one parent's not managing it the right way, that's a huge consideration. So I think those are the two big ones. You know, if you're really going to get a judge's attention, if you show that something's impacting the kid's health and medical well-being, or if it's impacting their academics, a judge is going to put a lot of focus upon that. I think that kind of combining that question with something you said earlier about misconceptions, I think it's worth touching on if we're talking about custody. A lot of people, I'm stunned at how many people have the idea about how custody works. They'll make a statement something along the lines of, everyone gets 50-50, or they always do 50-50, and that's just not true at all. I think the closest you can say to that would be, in our modern society, a judge may see it as a hoped-for ideal that people could share a child 50-50. That's nice if we could live in that world. But the minute the evidence shows the best interest of the child points in some other direction, that's out the window, and a judge is going to deviate from that. So a lot of people have the idea that, it doesn't matter, I'm not even going to go to court and bother to fight because we already know it's going to be 50-50. That's not true at all. If you've got a reason that shouldn't be 50-50, meaningful. If you got two people that are both pretty good people, pretty good parents, and they're debating the finer points of, one person's 99 on a scale of 100, one person's 97, well, that's probably going to be a 50-50 situation. But if someone is clearly a better parent or one person is really a bad parent, judges deviate from 50-50 physical custody all the time.
In my personal experience, that was one of the things they had asked about his involvement in the parenting, and that was played a big part in who got custody and how much. So yeah. I made sure that I was documenting everything, so I always tell everybody, document. Let's talk about legal versus emotional decisions. How do you advise clients to balance legal decisions with emotional considerations during family law dispute?
Well, it probably goes back to what I was saying before about going through a divorce or having any issue in family court is very stressful, very traumatic. It's hard to even think clearly for a lot of people. And I think that the world's full of family court litigants who they struggle with a barrier. The barrier is there's nothing wrong with me. I don't have a mental problem, and therefore I don't need to go to therapy. And I think back to what you're asking before about misconceptions, that's a big misconception. In my opinion, unless it's a very, very amicable, friendly divorce, if you're fighting about kids, if you're fighting about anything, it's traumatic. And trauma is something that benefits from therapy. And I think most divorce litigants are really selling themselves short, depriving themselves of help if they don't get the benefit of therapy. So let's assume someone is doing that. Then the emotional, legal decision-making balance kind of takes care of itself, because the therapist, who's trained to deal with how someone feels and make them feel better, can focus on that. And the lawyer, who's not trained on how to make people feel better, can focus on fighting for them and advocating for them and navigating the law, the things that they are trained to do. Because, otherwise, if people see it the other way and say, well, my lawyer is there to make me feel better, they may be very disappointed, and they may have a really good lawyer. It's just not the lawyer's training and skill set.
No, absolutely will agree with you on that. My first stop was getting a divorce attorney, and then my second stop was going into therapy so that I knew how to manage my emotions, because I knew that that was going to be something that might come up in court, because you have to rehash things that happened. So. And
let me just say, for the benefit of anyone listening to this who may struggle with the idea of, is divorce something that you need therapy for, and is it something that's traumatic and upsetting? Let me tell you, as someone who was a divorce lawyer before I ever went through a divorce. So I'm someone who already practiced divorce law at a high level. I knew the process. I knew mentally that there were a lot of things I shouldn't have been afraid of because I dealt with every day and I saw people not dying and, life not coming to an end just because they went through a divorce. It doesn't matter. Our subconscious, our animal brain gets in a vulnerable position, and our mind just imagines worst case scenarios. And as a divorce litigant, you lie in bed at night thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? I don't think the judge will believe that story against me about something I didn't do, but what if the judge does? And that can be so gut-wrenching that a person can't even see straight. And so in those situations, I think therapy is not necessarily there to fix someone's mental deficiency or anything like that. It's just to help someone cope with a really upsetting set of circumstances that would be hard for any human being, really.
Oh, no, I agree. Even if it's an amicable, you still need the therapy to, know how to co-parent moving forward. I mean, there's still those emotions attached, so I completely agree with you. That's why I jumped right in to therapy. So let's talk about changing dynamics. How have you seen family law evolve over the years, particularly regarding issues like same-sex marriages, cohabitation, and parental rights?
That's a good question, but I think that the answer to it probably is that family court, if we can view this in a good way, is probably something very stable that you can rely on that doesn't really change much in the sense that it's always there to figure out what's best for kids. It's always there to divide things fairly. Yes, new twists and turns come along, and we have to be sensitive to the needs of any new development. We have, thank God America recognized that same-sex couples have the right to marriage just as anybody else, and all the headaches that go with it, right? And that's there. And but I guess my point is the good thing is that people in that situation don't get treated any differently. And I think maybe one of the things that's changed probably in my lifetime in family court is that people are viewed more equally than maybe in the past. I think in the past there were stereotypes about gender roles, that maybe the mother's supposed to play this role and the father's supposed to play that role. And maybe in many cases it does work that way. But there's more of an open mind, I think, in family court these days to look at people and not jump to conclusions based on whether someone's a man or a woman or whether they're gay or they're straight or anything else, but to just look at people the same way. And then what you were talking about, what was it you said about cohabitation?
Gotta scroll back.
So, yeah.
Just talking about, for example, I'm from Florida and I don't know the laws there, so I'm never going to pretend like I do. But I know that when I moved here, there was something as like as long as you lived together like 10 years or something, you're considered married in the eyes of the law.
Yeah, North Carolina is not one of those states.
No?
So
Okay.
North Carolina doesn't recognize common law marriage
That's what it was.
that would happen just by virtue of living together. And, smart people can have different opinions about whether it's good or bad to have that, but we don't have that in this state. And really, there certainly aren't as many rights as far as property when it comes to unmarried couples. And that's either something the law needs to develop on, or it's something people just need to be aware of and educated about. If people are married or not married and they acquire property together, contract law can protect them. People can enter into contracts even if they're not married, and contracts are enforceable. But most people in that situation, if they're living together unmarried, don't think to write up a contract, right? But that's there, and that's something.
I mean, it's better than nothing.
Right.
Honestly. All right, so let's talk about the impact of technology. We'll have all this social media now, and everybody can post whatever they want on there. So what role does technology play in modern family law, from evidence gathering to communication between parties?
Well, it's made communication a constant thing, and it's made knowing what we all are doing at any minute of the day, including kids who have phones and iPads and things like that, knowing where someone is, what they're doing, what they bought, how much it cost, what they were listening to, what they were looking at, in the internet browser. It's been a tool people can use to figure out if someone's being unfaithful, It's a tool to figure out and prove where someone was with the other man or the other woman, with cell towers, the geolocation technology of knowing exactly where someone was on planet Earth at a given moment and knowing, oh, wow, it was at his house or her house. Knowing those things has been really useful in proving things in court. I think that's good. I think that it drastically would reduce the number of times where a judge would just guess and get it wrong. If a judge has no evidence about where someone was and what they're doing, and all the judge hears is someone's testimony that I think he's cheating with this person at this place, and the other person says, no, I wasn't, and I swear to God I wasn't, and the judge just has to guess at who's telling the truth. I think it's harder to deliver justice that way. So I think electronics, the internet, these have been ways to gather useful information that helps deliver justice in family court.
Absolutely, especially when you have to prove evidence of, if you have a DVPO, and like in my case with the threats, communicating threats and things of that nature, or breaking it. So I think it's great now versus I called them up and said something and then clicked on the cell phone. It's like, oh, back in the day when they had the cell phone and the thing in the 80s.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, talking about evidence to prove things or not, when we lived in a world where maybe you didn't have voicemails and texts, you just have to go by someone's word as to whether they said something on the phone or not. But now with the ease of recording conversations, it's easier to get proof.
All right, and we're back. Have a little break there. All right, so moving forward, let's talk about advice that you would have for families. Like, what proactive steps can families take to avoid legal conflicts in the future, and how can they prepare for potential disputes?
Those are great questions, and thinking about that, I guess what I would say is, first of all, let me just emphasize loud and clear, I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not any of those things. So I'm not here to give anyone advice about their marriage or their relationships or anything like that. But as a divorce lawyer who's been doing this a long time, you do notice patterns about what seem to be the problems that lead to not only breakdowns in marriage, but hostility and high conflict in marriages. And if you can try to avoid the things that lead to that, it'll give you a better chance. And, I think that's what you're asking. And if it's not, it'll be interesting anyway. But, the sort of things that I notice time after time about why marriages fail, people come into my office, they get into high conflict divorces, and it seems like they're failing due to mental health issues, substance abuse, infidelity, financial stresses, and then sometimes just non-communication, where if people are unhappy and they don't communicate, and so rather than work on whatever the problem is, they both feel wounded and resentful, and they just drift further apart in their anger, and eventually, a lot of times, not having happiness together, one person finds someone else, and then the other person catches them, and then we're back into the infidelity that I mentioned. But I think what people can do is address problems head on, work on problems, be communicative about problems, don't let them fester. And for the other things I was talking about, mental health and substance abuse, access therapy and healthcare, and medications and training, and people can go to marriage counseling, they can go to parenting classes, they can do all the things, and just communicate and work on these things to try to stay out of court. But I think if someone can make their best effort and still end up in divorce court because the other person just decides to take them there, and in those situations, all someone can really do along the way, be a good parent, be as good a spouse as they can be. Try to be fair, try to be respectful, try to make good decisions. Don't take out your anger on people physically or with emotional abuse. Be a good person, be smart, and at least you give yourself a better chance. And Absolutely. Then I think the other part of your question was, how to prepare if you do end up in court. Mm-hmm. Some of the things people don't do, they don't keep good records, both of finances and of events. And then if they end up in court and they want to talk about some asset that they acquired before the marriage, they want to prove that it's premarital so they can keep that and not have to divide it. But along the way, they've lost all the records, and the marriage may go so far back that the financial company maybe doesn't have the records. So they've lost the paper records. They haven't been organized with things like that. Same thing with non-financial records. Their case may hinge on proving infidelity or proving mistreatment of the kids, and maybe it's in a text where someone admits to that, and they've deleted all their texts. So they got a new phone, and when they got the new phone, they didn't copy over all the history from the old phone. Things like that happen. So to prepare. One thing people could do to prepare for family court, if they think to themselves, I'm not sure, but maybe I might end up in divorce court, you could go sit down in a courtroom in your local divorce court in your local county and just watch for a few hours or a day and see what happens. You'll get a sense of what it's like. You'll see that it's not like what you see on TV, and you'll get an idea of what people have to do to get good results from judges. That's what people can do. They can also consult with lawyers preemptively. And I have some smart clients do that. They say, I'm not in a divorce. I hope I don't end up in a divorce, but my marriage is in a rocky place, and I just want your advice on what can I do to protect myself in case I end up there. That's a very smart thing to do.
Absolutely. It's just like changing the oil in your car and making sure that the maintenance is going. So the little question I just have, what about prenups and postnups?
Well, those are great tools. If they're used the right way, it I think can avoid confusion in a marriage and maybe make the marriage less likely to end in divorce. I think some people don't want to go that route because they think that it's sort of a prelude or a recipe for the marriage ending, that you're imagining an ending, and I don't want to imagine that, so I don't want to imagine a prenup. But I've had many clients over the years that one of the reasons they fight so hard in divorce court is they've got an unrealistic idea of what they might get out of it. They somehow think that there's more than 100% of the money to divide. And what I mean by that is there's a limited pool of money a judge can divide. A judge can't wave a magic wand and just make money appear. And so if this is your stack of money, whether the judge gives it 50-50 to each spouse or even gives one spouse all of it, it's limited to that stack of money. The judge can't award twice that amount of money. That amount of money doesn't exist. But there are some people that don't really have that understanding of how things work, and they may think, just based on their misunderstanding, that they can go to divorce court and walk away like they won the lottery, even though there isn't that kind of money in the marriage. And if people have a prenup where they disclose all their financial interests and they lay out a plan for what each person is going to get if they leave the marriage, a lot of times people will float along and they have a marriage problem and they'll think, well, let's see, the prenup says I get this, and that's not really the jackpot I hoped that it would be. Maybe I ought to work on my marriage.
I agree with you. I think that if we started with that, I look at marriage differently than probably most other people. They do it for love. I look at it, it's a business agreement. And you're coming into this business with me and we agree to do this. So I want to know what happens if that agreement goes south.
And hopefully for people it's both. I would hope that marriages have love, a lot of it, as well as a sense of partnership.
No, absolutely. I feel like the partnership part is kind of overlooked most of the time for the love, which is understandable. But protect yourself. Again, my mom was a paralegal. She's been doing that since I was like 15, and I learned so much from her.
Paralegals know a lot. They see a lot.
She was the one that taught me. She's like, don't write anything down. Don't leave evidence. And I was like, that's an interesting thing to say to me. But when it comes to, on the flip side, somebody doing something to you, always document everything. And I was like, okay. Well,
and let me just say this. And I'll look into the camera for anyone watching on YouTube because this is important. A good rule to take with you in family court litigation, divorce court, anywhere else, yes, you have to know the law. Yes, you have to protect yourself. But you also have to exercise a big measure of common sense. So when someone tells you something, if you take it to a ridiculous extreme, that's going to make a bad impression with the judge. That's probably going to drive your ex crazy to where they maybe don't want to settle with you and life gets harder. But what made me think of that is when you said document everything. it's generally good to make sure no big important event that could be evidence in a case would be something you don't have any documentation of. That's true. But some people will take that to a ridiculous extreme, and they'll say, the attorney says, be sure to document everything, and they're walking around custody exchanges with either a pad and a pen or a recording device, and they're literally wanting to document everything, even if it puts the kid in the middle of conflict or creates stress. And so I always tell clients, use your common sense, do what I've told you to do, but at every moment you do it, just imagine a judge is sort of peeking around the corner or sitting in the room listening. Would you want to say or do what you did with the judge paying attention? Because if you wouldn't, then you probably want to do it another way.
That's great
because the
advice.
judge will probably end up hearing about it or seeing it, and you'll regret it if you didn't do it imagining a judge was in the room.
That is absolutely great advice. That is something that I try to live my life by. I don't always make the right decisions, but that's okay. You guys better. So let's talk about navigating the high conflict situations. How do you approach cases involving high conflict clients, and what strategies do you use to de-escalate the tensions?
Well, first of all, I'll say that there are some cases that really can't be de-escalated without getting in front of a judge. The judge is going to be the de-escalator. There are some people that are so far apart they can't possibly see eye to eye, and if one person says, it's red, and another person says it's blue, and there's no one wanting to compromise in the middle and saying it's green, then it's one or the other, and you're going to have to let a judge decide which it is. Now, how that can be a de-escalator, a lot of times people have, again, unrealistic ideas about what happens in court. Both parties may think that what's going to happen is I'm going to go to court and I'm going to get the whole loaf. I'm going to get 100% of what I want. And most of the time, the judge does something kind of in the middle of what both people expected. And once that's the outcome and people realize that and get a more realistic idea of what happens, a lot of times they lose steam and they say, okay, this is reality. Now I know what reality is. Let me see if I can live with reality. Let me see if I can compromise. Let me see if I can co-parent. And maybe things calm down. They don't always. Some people just keep fighting. But with high conflict cases, I think a lot of times you have to try to get people to understand that being at all out, burn it all down war with someone is not the best thing for your kids. And it's probably not the best thing for you to get a good result, because usually when people do that, they burn through all the money on lawyers. They end up hating each other so much they can't co-parent, and sometimes they're both traumatized for life. So it's good to fight, but you can fight without being savage toward each other. And another important point is, if you're malicious and savage and a horrible human being in the way you fight with your spouse, judges don't look very kindly on that. They'll typically view that person as the problem, and that won't help you get what you want. So yes, be aggressive. Yes, fight for yourself and advocate for yourself aggressively through your lawyer or pro se. But you don't want to do it in a hateful, spiteful, vindictive, malicious way. Judges don't like that, and why would they?
No, and I think it circles back around to common sense.
Right.
So making sure that we use that. Let's talk about ethical dilemmas. Have you encountered ethical dilemmas in your practice, and how do you navigate situations where legal interest and ethical considerations may conflict?
That's a good question, and I don't mean to sound like this is a simple question or that I'm, have it all figured out or anything. I don't view it that way at all. But because I don't ever want to have ethical dilemmas or ethical problems, I err on the side of, when in doubt, you go by the rules. When in doubt, if you're not sure, you talk. Maybe you've got a situation where it's not clear whether to do something would violate a rule or not. That's probably when the two lawyers should talk about the situation and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and we both need to protect our client, but we need to make sure we don't have an issue. Let's exchange ideas on how we deal with this so that there's no confusion, no problem. And see, there may be someone watching or listening that says, hey, you're a divorce lawyer. You're supposed to be a bulldog. You're supposed to just slit people's throats. That's what you pay people to do. And some people view it that way. But let me say, this is an important concept for people to grasp. It will help life go better for them in divorce court. Yes, you want an aggressive, go on the attack divorce lawyer who will do that within the rules and not be afraid to. And some people like me, they like it. I'm a former athlete. I used to play football. I like going on the attack. But you have to do it ethically, and here's why. Number one, not only is it right, and you want to be able to sleep at night, and you want to be in harmony with the world, whatever you believe the higher power is, but more importantly, just for practical reasons, your attorney's reputation with judges and with other lawyers is what enables them to get cases settled. It's what enables them to persuade a judge to see it their way. If a judge isn't quite sure and a judge thinks, well, this attorney right here has always told me the truth. So if they're arguing that, I'm on the fence, but I think I'm going to go with them because I can trust this lawyer. The minute you start breaking rules and lying and being dishonest and hiding things, you lose credibility with judges, you lose credibility with other lawyers. And if you don't have credibility with lawyers and judges and you're trying to practice family law, you're not going to get good results for your clients. So I really think, yes, I understand the anger and the tension that people feel when their marriage is falling apart and they really feel like someone has, ripped their heart out of them. I understand the feeling of wanting to hurt somebody, but we can't approach that in an unethical way, because when people do, it always bites them in the you-know-what.
Absolutely. And the whole point of coming to family law court is not to seek revenge. It's to settle the dispute, essentially.
And that's a great point, because why? Because family court is not set up to be able to deliver revenge. Mm-hmm. And you can make the best argument in the world for why a judge should exact revenge on the other person, and it won't matter. The judge is not going to do it because the judge doesn't have the authority to do it. The statute doesn't grant the judge the power to give you revenge.
Absolutely. And that's something I think we need to think about when we go to a family attorney and stop asking for bulldogs.
Right.
I find it so comical because sometimes you'll see these in the moms groups and they're like, I need a bulldog of an attorney. And I'm like, but you also need someone who's competent in their job, who understands your case, who's going to get you what you deserve, not what you want. So take that into consideration. So let's talk about cultural consideration. How do cultural backgrounds and values influence family law cases, and how do you ensure that your practice is culturally sensitive?
Well, obviously, it's the right thing to do for anybody to be sensitive to someone's needs and feelings, regardless of cultural background, any other consideration. Hopefully, we live in a world where people have become more sensitive to that and started to understand that. But I think judges take very seriously their duty to be impartial. And I think all lawyers ought to go into court and go into representing clients, looking at everybody equally as a human being and trying to figure out what's the right thing for them and how to advocate for it, and not let any of that enter into it. But at the same time, a lawyer needs to be sensitive to whatever the client's sensitive to. So if the client has sensitivities to cultural considerations or anything like that, to be a good advocate is to empathize with your client and to understand them. And so there are times where I've had to say to clients I was representing who are from a foreign country and another culture, when they're talking about something that doesn't really immediately sound like something I can understand, where there's an emphasis on something that may not be typical in the United States, I'm not afraid to ask a client, let me ask you, is that something that's particularly important in your culture? Because if it is, I want to understand that. And almost always when I've asked someone that, they've said, yes, I'm glad you asked. I didn't want to offend you by making it about my culture, but no, tell me. And the clients will tell me, and it's a lot easier to understand the conflict between spouses sometimes if there's a culture that maybe the lawyer or the judge doesn't understand, but the lawyer needs to understand it to be able to explain it to the judge. So that's a very important thing, and all we can do in the legal profession is do our best to work on that and be sensitive to it.
Absolutely, I agree. Because I noticed when I was going, because I had to sit and wait for other people in front of me to, tell their sides, and it just really made you kind of reflect on your own case. And you were like, oh, these are different things that are important to different people, and I would never even think about. So that's very important. I'm glad that you said that.
And by the way, you bring up a good thing. It made me think the world's full of people who go into family court and they just assume that a judge is, and I don't blame people for thinking this, but you view the judge as someone who's sitting up higher than everyone else, almost like they're omniscient, that they're going to know everything and understand everything. And I think it's important for people to know and remember judges are just human beings, and they make the same mistakes, and they have the same things they don't understand that anyone else does. And so it's important, if there's any sort of holiday or cultural practice that's important to you, if you don't mention it to a judge is not going to somehow mysteriously know to put into a court order that you observe a holiday that may not be on the typical U.S. school calendar or bank calendar. There are lots of holidays in cultures that maybe are different from the typical ones that get written into orders. And that has to be communicated to a lawyer so a lawyer can explain to the judge why it's important, and it is important.
No, absolutely. Like our family is not religious necessarily, so there are a lot of things that we don't observe, and so when it came down to custody, it wasn't important for me to have them for these particular holidays. So I think that also has to take consideration of that too, right?
Right, and there are some people who have religious holidays that in the American banking and educational system won't show up on a calendar of holidays, but they'll show up on the radar screen of anyone who practices that religion. And those are things that people need to advocate for so that judges understand, so that they get the result they want.
Absolutely. Let's talk about future trends. What trends do you foresee shaping the future of family law, particularly with the emergence of new family structures and societal norms?
Oh, that's a great question. And gosh, I wish I could predict the future, don't we all? And that's something I have to explain to clients sometimes when they want to talk to a judge about what may or may not happen in the future. It's important to tell people that, and I'll get to your question, but judges can only operate based on what they know, not what on may happen or may not happen. Those are called speculative considerations. Judges are not allowed to consider things like that. So I mention that because when people start talking about the future, I often respond that way. I'll tell clients, we don't have a crystal ball. The judge doesn't have a crystal ball. But, we can see trends. And when you talk about what the future may hold, I think technology is progressing rapidly with things like artificial intelligence. What's that going to mean as far as a lot of different things? People may be able to do some parts of their case themselves and let their lawyers focus on the legal aspects. It'll be a tool for lawyers to be able to help clients with things that they may not otherwise have expertise in. But, technology is going to be a big part of that. As far as trends, did you say with non-traditional families?
They have different family structures now, and as we know, everyone is not deciding about gender roles and things of that nature, and obviously there's, gay and stuff like that. So I just didn't know if there was like a trend that you would see that would kind of change that based on the new family structures.
It's hard to really say because of two things. Courts have to be fair to everybody, no matter what they bring to the table. And then secondly, you have to take each case on its individual facts. So on the one hand, when you bring up things like that, they're important, and we all want to be sensitive to things, but we have to remember that court's all about trying to be fair and even-handed and treat everyone the same to the point that you can. So I think back to what we're talking about if judges are going to know about a special holiday being important, people have to tell them. If there's anything about a client or their kids that maybe a judge wouldn't understand, or someone's not sure a judge would understand, that's where expert witnesses can be very helpful. If you have someone who maybe is dealing with a non-binary gender type issue and they're worried that maybe a judge won't understand the importance of it, a good therapist, if it involves a child psychologist can really investigate that and come and explain it to the judge. So the judge isn't left sort of guessing based on what they know, which may not be enough. Judges are good at deferring to experts on things that they don't really know about. So litigants may be in situations where they say, hey, I've got an issue and I'm worried that the judge won't understand it and therefore won't get justice. Maybe not, but an expert in that area can explain it to a judge. And if it's someone with more expertise than the judge has, then the judge is going to typically defer to them, and that will help someone get the outcome they're looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that advice. So let's talk about personal reflections. What has been the most rewarding aspect of your work as a family law attorney, and how has it shaped your perspective on family dynamics?
That's a good question. The most rewarding aspect of my work is, I think, taking people in situations where they feel helpless or hopeless or like they don't have a voice or that they're being bullied and there's no one to stand with them, and standing up for those people and fighting for them and making them feel like there's hope, making them feel like somebody cares. It means the world to me. We've all felt those feelings at times, and maybe not in a divorce situation, but in some aspect of our life. Mm-hmm. And we've all wished and hoped and sometimes prayed that someone would come along to help. So it feels good to be someone who helps. And I've been the person that was worried and hurt and suffering, and I like helping people in that situation. But also, probably one of the most rewarding aspects of my practice is telling people there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm divorced, but at the same time, I am very happily, wonderfully married. I'm remarried. She's not on camera, but my lovely, beautiful wife is sitting at the other end of the table. She means the world to me. And a lot of times in life, what seems like the worst thing that'll ever happen to you may be, but it may not be the end of the story, and there may be something much, much better that's waiting. And so it feels good to be able to look at clients and tell them that no good marriage ends in divorce, and if that's where they are, whether they want to be or not, that something better is waiting for them. Whatever that something is, it's better than being in a miserable marriage. I mean, it'll either be finding someone they are happy with or living a happy life on their own, but not in a miserable, sometimes abusive marriage. People don't need to be in that situation, and there is something better.
I agree 100%. If it wasn't for my divorce, it would never be to the level I am right now. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. So do you want to look at the camera right there and tell everybody where they can find you if they ever see themselves in the position of needing you?
I'm happy to help anyone with family court issues at GanttFamilyLaw.com, spelled GANTT, familylaw.com. My email is richard@GanttFamilyLaw.com, and I and my team of attorneys and support staff are there to fight for people and to care about people. And we do it every day, and we'd love to help you if anyone needs help.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for coming to my office.
So I appreciate that. We like to do it live on location, so you can come in and have a very nice conversation in this wonderful conference room.
All right. All the best to everyone out there.
Thank you.